Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. And we start with a big step forward in the fight over Governor Eric Holcomb's emergency powers during the pandemic. A Senate committee this week approved a stripped-down version of the emergency powers bill. The new version removes a 60-day limit on emergency declarations and eliminates a provision that stopped local governments from imposing tougher restrictions than the state. It does still include a part that allows the legislature to call itself into special session to review the governor's actions. It's a step the governor's office calls flatly unconstitutional. And we welcome in former Indiana Supreme Court Justice Frank Sullivan. Justice Sullivan, always good to see you. Sarah, thank you for taking some time. So you testified before the committee last week saying that allowing the legislature to call itself into special session would be unconstitutional. Why?
Thanks, Mr. Sanchez, for the chance to be with you. The Indiana Constitution contains in it only two ways of convening the legislative session. The annual regular session, and then the governor may call the legislature into session, but the Constitution says only if, in his opinion, the public welfare requires it. A different provision of the Indiana Constitution, our separation of powers provision, specifically prohibits any branch of government from exercising a power entrusted to another branch. So those two provisions together, the provision that gives the governor the exclusive authority to convene the legislative session, and the separation of powers clause, which prohibits other branches of government from exercising powers entrusted to other branches, combine to make the provision in the legislation now pending in the legislature unconstitutional.
Would that require a constitutional amendment to call them back?
I think it clearly would, and of course the legislature can pass a constitutional amendment and then see what the people think about it. But if they think that the powers that they have now under the Constitution are not sufficient, the right way to change that is, as you suggest, a constitutional amendment, not an unconstitutional bill. So
should the legislature have some type of power to curb or even override emergency orders, in your opinion?
Well, that's really not the purpose of my testimony. The purpose of my testimony was to express an opinion as to whether this particular provision would meet constitutional muster or not. I leave it to the legislative branch to determine whether the emergency powers that they've given the governor were too extensive or not. Remember that everything that the governor has done in dealing with the pandemic has been pursuant to authority that was given to him by the legislature in the first place. And if they want to amend that legislation, that's certainly within their prerogative. We can debate whether or not the governor's efforts over the course of the last year to keep us safe have been effective, whether they have been more extensive than necessary.
Right.
But everything that he has done, he's done pursuant to authority that the legislature gave him in the first place.
Former Supreme Court Justice Frank Sullivan, thank you for spending some time with us and sifting through all the legalities of this. Thank you again, Justice Sullivan.
You're quite welcome.
Another fight over government power, this one between Washington, D.C. and the state. Senator Mike Braun and Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita fighting the provision of the COVID-19 relief bill. It says states that accept the relief money are banned from cutting taxes as a result. Indiana stands to get $3.2 billion for state government and another $2.5 billion for local governments. Our All Indiana Politics team asks Republican Senator Todd Young if he believes the tax cut ban is unconstitutional.
It probably is unconstitutional. In the end, the courts will decide that. So I think litigating this matter makes sense. As a matter of public policy, It makes absolutely no sense. Well, we have a federalist system in this country, meaning the national government, the federal government, is not supposed to take over all the prerogatives of our state governments. In the state of Indiana, we've done a very good job over the years of bringing our revenues and expenditures in line with one another and coming up with a rainy day fund. You compare that to, say, the state of Illinois, where they've done a really poor job, and they therefore have seen some dire financial situations. So look, why don't we handle Indiana's finances the way Indiana's voters determine we should, and that includes our tax policy, as opposed to having folks in Washington dictate all of our public policies.
And this was also a big week for immigration in D.C. as well. The House passing two bills. One creates a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers. The other offers legal status to 1 million immigrant farm workers. Meanwhile, 40 Senate Republicans, including Braun and Young, want President Biden's move to stop border wall construction declared illegal. Young says the decision has contributed to a crisis on the southern border.
It is a humanitarian crisis, a national security crisis, and frankly, it doesn't have to be this way. This is all on account of the change in policies we've seen coming out of this administration. They've significantly exacerbated the existing situation we saw at our southern border because of things that were said over the course of a political campaign, creating false hope to people in Mexico and in the so-called triangle countries south of Mexico, and because of actual policies that have already been implemented during these first 50-plus days of the Biden administration. The Biden administration needs to swallow what I know is going to be a difficult pill in admitting that the previous administration was correct to crack down on border security.
Young is also kicking off his re-election bid. He's hoping for a second term in office, already picking up top Republican support with the partisan rancer in Congress and D.C. Our team asked why he wants to do the job for another 6 years.
Well, I love serving the people of Indiana. I have demonstrated that I not only can advance conservative values, but I can persuade my colleagues on the other side of the aisle of the merits of those conservative values. Most recently, have persuaded a number of my colleagues to embrace some legislation related to cracking down on China and its predatory economic practices, and ensuring that the United States outgrows and outcompetes the Chinese. So that's one of many examples of the sort of things that Hoosier sent me to Washington to work on.
Coming up, Central Indiana communities joining forces to fight gun crimes. Why one mayor says the right decision is work across county lines. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday as we start to talk crime and guns here in Central Indiana. The leaders of 8 Indiana counties may be ready to join forces on illegal firearms. A plan before the General Assembly right now would allow Marion and 7 surrounding counties to work together as a group to track the guns used in crimes. The goal? Pool resources and information to help cut violent crimes throughout Central Indiana.
Welcome in. Scott Fadden is from the city of Fisher, suddenly in the spotlight this week, really across the region because of the possibility of lawmakers moving forward with a gun crime partnership for a number of counties to participate in. This is something that the mayor knows well. Tell us about what IMPD and Fisher's police have been doing and why it might be helpful to the conversation about whether to do it on a larger scale.
Well, I think we're all reminded every weekend we wake up in the morning and see another, frankly, symbol of just how bad things have gotten around violent crime. And we started working with IMPD a couple of years ago on this idea of the Crime Gun Intelligence Center, which they were innovators in this space and brought it to Indianapolis. And it really uses advancements in technology and data to identify who those shooters are and the guns they're using. And then we can go after and get those individuals. Why is that important to our region? When we started doing this work with them 2 years ago, we started processing our guns just the same way IMPD does and use the same technology to track these firearms. Out of the 184 firearms, illegal crime guns that we took off the streets in the city of Fishers, when we processed those the right way, there were 101 instances tied back to violent crimes in our region, in Indianapolis and around surrounding communities. If you think about that, we were coming across these violent felons, these violent criminals, time and time again, and not knowing it because we weren't working across political boundaries. So when we realized that and we understood the impact of this, we believed that as a region, we could come together and really put a dent in this violent crime.
I listened to that number, 184 guns, and that's in Fishers. That's not on the 96th Street side of Indianapolis. That's north of that line that some would think, well, that's not as big a problem up there. Does that number surprise you? What were your expectations coming into this?
It did. I mean, I think all of us are waking up to the fact that these criminals, they don't respect political boundaries. They don't care if it's Fishers on the north side and Indy on the south side of 96th Street. And so these criminals and the crime guns that they're carrying are proliferating across all of central Indiana. And if we don't come together as a region and deal with this collectively, using the innovation that, frankly, the IMPD has brought to central Indiana, then we've missed out on a huge opportunity to have an impact on these neighborhoods that are, frankly, being terrorized by the violence that we see day in and day out.
Politically, it's difficult to talk about guns without raising alarms in Indiana. This is still a state that very much resists the idea of new gun legislation. This would be a law that connects to guns. Do you have any concerns about that?
I'm a big Second Amendment proponent. A lot of the people involved in this are. This has nothing to do with someone who is a legal person who's carrying a firearm. This is only about guns that have been used in a criminal act. Those are the only guns that go through this process. If a gun is found at a drive-by shooting, if ballistic evidence is found at an armed robbery, those are the firearms that we're interested in. The average Hoosier that's walking around with a firearm because they're a law-abiding citizen has no concern whatsoever with this program because it doesn't involve them.
You have better touch sometimes with the mayors than we might just as the voters, because we see what the lawmakers do down at the State House. Do you get the sense that these other communities want to be involved in this?
That's one of the rewarding things about this initiative. I've gone around and spoken to every mayor or chief elected official in the communities around central Indiana, and I'm proud to say I have every single one of their support, Republican and Democrat. And we also have every single law enforcement agency supporting this initiative. So I feel really, really good about, for one of the first times that I can recall, we are solidified around this issue, and we're going to marshal our collective resources and go try to address this, and frankly hold people accountable that are causing undue harm and injury to our residents.
We'll certainly watch it through the rest of the State House session, and then if it gets implemented, how it works across the region. Scott Fadness, Mayor of Fishers, thank you.
Thank you.
And coming up, President Biden celebrates milestones in the fight against COVID-19 and criticism for his handling of immigration. Our political experts talk about those topics next on All Indiana Politics. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday morning as we welcome back Republican April Gregory and Democrat Brian Gaddy. Good to see you both. Let's start by talking about the fight against COVID-19 on this Sunday, guys. COVID relief money on its way to families and state and local governments. And the country on Friday passed 100 million vaccines delivered. And Brian, we'll go to you first on this one. This gives the president, I would imagine, a chance to kind of say that he's met his promises on relief earlier than expected. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. President Biden is taking a well-deserved victory lap. He's traveling the country along with Vice President Kamala Harris. And together, they're going to show the American people that we finally have a president and a vice president that is taking COVID seriously. Obviously, the previous administration did not take it seriously, and the numbers were out of control. COVID-19 damaged our country's economy, not to mention over 500,000 Americans lost their lives because of President Trump's incompetence. So there's no doubt about it. President Biden and Vice President Harris are doing a great job. Most Americans are going to have $1,400 checks in their bank accounts. That's because of President Biden and the Democrats that passed the $1.9 trillion package in the Congress. So President Biden definitely deserves all the credit, no doubt about it. He's doing a great job.
April, why does it seem like Republicans were against this from the start?
This is a $1.9 trillion bill that has 9% of it going to COVID relief. What is the other 91% of support? Why should we expect to vote for that? They're not going to. give us our stimulus, give us our relief, and take your pet projects to other bills. We're not going to vote for that much pork.
Brian, is that number right? 9% only going towards COVID relief, or is it more than that?
It's more than that. And then the Republicans, they always love to say there's pork in this bill or whatever. But yet the fact is, when you don't have if you were not going to get your $1,400 check, that would have been because of the Republicans. Senator Todd Young and Senator Mike Braun both voted against the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. So when you have your $1,400, you can thank President Biden, Vice President Harris, and the Democratic Party and the Democrats in Congress.
April, do you foresee maybe the Republicans getting on board if there is a need for another package down the road?
The economy was already starting to not need to keep bringing in $1 trillion to keep things going. It's already was starting. Like, let's let this get to work. Let's quit talking about spending all this money we don't have.
Brian, and one more question about the relief bill. Do you foresee maybe Democrats asking for more money within the next 6 months to a year?
Well, we'll see what happens with the economy. But I always find it interesting when we get a president in the White House that's a Democrat, Republicans all become born-again fiscal conservatives. But when they have the White House, which hopefully will be a very long time before they get it back again, they're profligate spenders. So they like to spend a lot when they have the White House, but as soon as we Democrats get the White House, they get born-again fiscal conservatives. The hypocrisy is just staggering.
Brian, what about the tax cut ban for states? Senator Todd Young is calling it unconstitutional earlier in our show. Your response to that, was that a mistake for Democrats to add that in?
I don't think so, and I think if it is adjudicated before a court, that should be handled by judges. I'm not an attorney, I'm a businessman, so I think that should be handled by the courts, but I don't think that was a mistake.
Fair enough. Let's talk southern border now. Is there really a crisis, April? And if so, who's to blame?
Well, the border situation was under control under President Trump. And then we have a campaign by Biden and Harris, which was all about amnesty. There's a mass amnesty. Rhetoric. Of course they're coming. Of course more people are going to come. And now we're shipping the kids who come across the border to Dallas to house them there because there's no more room at the border. Of course they're going to come. This is when Biden rolled back the asylum policies of President Trump, where President Trump had them wait in Mexico before granted asylum. Biden rolls that back, and if you look at the pictures of the border, they're just filing in line. It's out of control, and yes, it is a crisis. Whether or not anybody on the left wants to say it, it's a crisis.
Brian?
Well, first of all, the border wall that former President Trump talked about was going to stop the immigration. Obviously, that didn't work because, first of all, it was never a wall in the first place. It was just rhetoric, hollow rhetoric from former President Trump. The fact is, we're not caging children like that happened with the former President Trump. We have an issue here where people are coming in from these other countries because they have issues in their own country, such as obviously stagnant economies, internal strife, and they're coming to America because they're looking for a better way of life. We're not going to solve this problem, April and my Republican friends, by demonizing these immigrants. And that's what Republicans are doing with this issue. They're demonizing immigrants. We are going to solve it by working with the countries they're coming from, so that way we improve the conditions where they're in those countries, so that way they won't come to the United States in the first place. But when they do come here, we have a humane policy that's been enacted by President Biden and Vice President Harris of not, first of all, caging children, separating them from their parents, and trying to deal with this issue in a humane way, which is a lot better than what happened in the previous administration, which was very inhumane.
We'll leave it right there. We'll see what happens with that issue. Brian Gaddy and April Gregory, always good to see you. Thank you for spending some time.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Take All Indiana Politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. We're also on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Have a great rest of your weekend.